Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. I'm Armand Georgian in Brussels. Facebook is grappling with the most serious crisis in the company's history. Tens of millions of users have had their personal information mined and traded off without their knowledge or permission. The beneficiary was Cambridge Analytica, a digital marketing firm that used the data to influence voters in the US election won by Donald Trump. Cambridge Analytica also played a role in the Vote Leave campaign in Britain in 2016. Facebook has apologized and announced several measures, but it's not the first such privacy scandal to hit the tech giant, so it's perhaps understandable that some are skeptical about this latest mea culpa. Well, to debate how best to protect people's data, I'm joined by Sophie in 't Veld, a Dutch MEP from the group of Liberals and Democrats. Welcome to you. Sophie sits on the Committee for Civil Liberties. Also to welcome Axel Voss, a German MEP from the Conservative group, the European People's Party, who's also a significant player on data protection here at the Parliament. Welcome to you. And also, last but certainly not least, Petr Ježek, a Czech Liberal who heads the Committee on Financial Crimes, Tax Evasion and Tax Avoidance. Thanks for being here. Of course, we'll be talking about the tax issues surrounding tech giants a bit later. Before we come to talk about Facebook, though, let's just look at the latest developments surrounding this scandal.
Regulation on the internet is inevitable. That was the message from the embattled Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg as he faced a second day of questioning in the US Capitol. However, in a testy early exchange with lawmakers, he declined to promise to change all users' default privacy settings to collect the minimum amount of personal information.
Congressman, this is a complex issue that I think deserves more than a one-word answer.
Instead, Zuckerberg said Facebook was doing an audit of third-party apps to make sure they weren't misusing information provided by Facebook users. He also apologized for having failed to check in 2015 that the political consultancy Cambridge Analytica had deleted information gathered about millions of Facebook users. The CEO said he had been deceived by the firm and that his own personal data was among that harvested.
When we first contacted Cambridge Analytica, they told us that they had deleted the data. And then about a month ago, we heard a new report that suggested that this was not true.
Facebook is now deciding whether to take action against the University of Cambridge, where the researcher said to have collected and sold personal data to Cambridge Analytica was based. Zuckerberg said the social media giant was also developing artificial intelligence to better police a number of areas of content, including foreign interference in elections. Mr. Zuckerberg said the company had new tools to identify fake accounts, but that it was hard to keep up with Russian operators seeking to exploit the social network.
For as long as Russia has people who are employed who are trying to perpetrate this kind of interference, it will be hard for us to guarantee that we're going to fully stop everything. But it's an arms race, and I think that we're making ground.
Zuckerberg said he had seen no evidence so far that Russia or China had attempted to scrape people's information using Facebook, but that it would be many months before a full audit of any possible mishandling of Facebook users' data would be complete.
Petr Ježek, you were watching Mark Zuckerberg's testimony to Congress. People in the US said it was pretty soft. Did you agree with that he wasn't particularly grilled?
Well, I think that he was grilled to a large extent, but the scandal is really huge, and he didn't have responses to some questions, and I'm afraid that Zuckerberg is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a wider problem when it comes to the data protection.
Sophie?
Well, yeah, I fully agree. It is the tip of the iceberg. I have to say, I sometimes have to smile a little bit at all the outrage, people discovering that Facebook is actually gathering data, personal data, and abusing them. That's not a surprise. But it has contributed a lot to this sudden awareness of people of the importance of data protection, not just for ourselves as individuals, but also for the quality of our democracy. And I think this new awareness is very important.
Axel Voss, so finally this issue that you've all been working on for a long time here, it's in the public eye, which I suppose is a good thing for you. I mean, to finally have the attention on this.
Yeah, so of course, to raise the awareness of for data protection, for privacy, etc., this is a good thing. But to have a scandal like this is obviously not a good thing. So I expect that, of course, Zuckerberg should be grilled for this, and also I would say should come here to our parliament also, and I'm expecting these. And I would say,
has he been invited to talk to the European Parliament?
So far, I know the president has already. I'm not sure in a written form, but he already said yes, he is interested to have Zuckerberg here.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting is what Zuckerberg himself has said, because next month, on the 25th of May, the new European data protection law will enter into force, and he has said, I want that to be the global standard. I will apply it in as many parts of the world as possible, which is good. Of course, Facebook, like many other firms, has resisted new data protection legislation, but now they actually understand it helps him to regain the trust
do you
of his
believe?
users.
But do you believe that when he says? I mean, it seems incredible that someone who's apologized so many times, and yet these things keep happening, that he would voluntarily apply something which is extraterritorial to the United States, for example. I mean, that seems quite far-fetched.
So after the first impression, of course, he's now under pressure and he has to do something, and we would take him on his word in saying he's coming up with a solution like the GDPR. And so therefore we have to check, and of course we will control this. And
So just for our viewers, let's lay out what is this GDPR, because obviously it's something not everyone knows about. What is this data protection measure exactly?
Well, it's basically it's a revised, an updated version of a law which already exists, and it really strengthens the position of users. For example, they really explicitly have to ask your consent. They cannot, for example, these 40-page legal English privacy notices. That is no longer allowed. They have to be very clear about what data they will use, what your rights are, where you can complain, how you can, let's say, stop them from collecting your data. So they have to do a lot more. And I think what is very important is also for that law to be properly enforced. Because what strikes me in this whole Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal is that we already have a law now. And basically, the European data protection authorities have not done anything. And this is not, this scandal, it was all not new. It was known before. So why have they been so slow to respond?
Has there been a problem of implementation so far? You agree with that?
But I think that the point really is that there's been a huge, significant development in the digital area in the last years. And this is the first reaction to this regulation, and that's why also the Zuckerberg and others, when cornered now, are calling for that. And it even looks like when the EU authorities ordered this scandal in order to make advertisement to the GDPR.
Just interested, what do you think is going to happen to the tech giants once the May 25th legislation comes into force? Do you expect advertisers to leave? Is the business model going to be harmed? I mean, what are the kind of effects that you think we're going to see?
I would say the business model will slightly change only, but they will pay more attention to the requirements what we have implemented in the GDPR. But I think they can't really afford to kill the whole business model. So that's why I think they change the terms and conditions, and we have to check these. But at the end, misusing of data is not hindered by a new data protection law. Misusing can happen also with the new GDPR.
but of course the controlling, the rules for legally using data is now specified in a way, and even profiling. We have also an own article on profiling on this, and this might, of course, affect also the Cambridge Analytica companies.
Well, but I think, yes, you're right, you cannot legislate against bad intentions, of course. But, and will the business model have to change? Well, yes, they may slightly have to adapt their business model, maybe also when the new e-privacy regulation enters into force that focuses very much on tracking and tracing, behavioral targeting, etc. But you know what? It cannot be a business model if it can only work if you violate a legal right. Yeah. Because the right to privacy protection and data protection is a legal right.
What if, though, the new directives only work in the EU, but they don't work somewhere else? What's the overall impact?
But they won't, because the EU is one of the biggest markets in the world. So anybody who wants to do business here and target a European audience will have to apply these standards. And now I think even in the United States, they're waking up, and these are market forces. That's the fantastic thing. Zuckerberg hasn't suddenly seen the light. No, he has seen the value of his shares drop. That's what he responds to.
I think they've rallied again now. But just on a related issue, we don't have a huge amount of time, but obviously there are these accusations from America that the EU is scaring off big tech companies through its planned taxation ideas. Is this is something you've worked on a lot, Peter Jerzek. If this Macron's plans for a tax on the so-called GAFA, if that actually goes through, does this mean that the tech giants, Google, Apple, Facebook and Amazon, will they simply move somewhere else, and the tax dumping will simply continue in another way?
The digital companies have outperformed the traditional ones. They change our economy and society significantly, but the tax environment hasn't changed. If we speak about Facebook, I think that in the outside the US, Facebook was taxed at the level of 5% of a tax rate, but more than half of its revenue comes from outside the US. So it doesn't fit together. And traditional companies are basically taxed at the rate of 23%, digital one at the rate of 9%.
There must be a lot of lobbying against this from the industry. I mean, do you feel that there is a general will in the EU to go ahead with this tax idea, Axel Voss?
So the political will is there, and I hope that the member states also come to a common approach on these and saying how they should tax the companies, also the big one. And because the digital world is kind of without boundaries any longer, so that's why it makes it so difficult for a regional legislator or national legislator, and therefore we have to do here something. Also, that we are making them more aware what's going on the platforms for security reasons, for copyright reasons, whatever it is. I think there is a kind of a change in thinking.
Well, I think this, well, you know, there are different, let's say, political interests, but I think most of the 512 million European citizens, and in particular those using the internet and social media, I mean, they are very aware that they are actually the business model. I mean, they're making money of our personal data. Now, you know, I'm a liberal. I think making money is fantastic. But in a democratic society, you then also pay your fair share of taxation. And if they make money of my personal data and your personal data, isn't it fair then that they should also contribute to public services, roads, schools, you know, I mean, to give something back to society.
Where are those extra tax dividends supposed to be spent on, actually? I mean, that's an important point. The new tax.
That's a different matter. I actually think there's an additional element which might be interesting. I mean, we tax companies and people in order to make their contribution to society, but also to change behavior, for example. We use that in order to encourage more environmentally friendly behavior. And I was thinking, if if we want companies to be more careful with our personal data, why don't we try and use taxation? You know, not just taxing the profits or the turnover, but why don't we tax somehow, why don't we monetize personal data? And see, because they earn money, and they actually have an incentive now to take more of our personal data and abuse them. Why don't we give them an incentive to be very careful with our personal data?
The tax debate is a whole other one. I'm sorry, we'll have to continue that another time, but we'll have to leave it there for now. I'd like to thank my guests, and now it's time for our Fact or Fake segment with Yves Bertoncini, President of the European Movement in France and former head of the Jacques Delors Institute.
The European Union and Hungary are the victims of an invasion of asylum seekers and migrants. It's what Viktor Orban declared to several European media in an effort to back his re-election as Prime Minister of Hungary. This blanket statement probably echoes the refugee crisis of the years 2015 and 16, 2 years during which 1.2 million asylum requests have been registered in the EU countries. Viktor Orban's statement is not at all consistent with the recent situation. The number of asylum seekers requests significantly dropped in 2017, reaching 650,000, a figure in line with the requests registered before the refugee crisis. In Hungary, the number of asylum requests dropped to a sixth between 2015 and 16, and again by a ninth between 2016 and 17. Hungary received a high number of requests in 2015, around 174,000. But in 2017, only 3,115 asylum requests were registered in this country, representing 0.5% of the requests of the whole EU and 0.03% of the Hungarian population. Finally, let's precise that Hungary accepted only 545 refugees in 2015 and 540 in 2016, since member states can accept asylum seekers' requests or not.
Well, that's it for part one of Talking Europe, but don't go away. In a few moments, we'll bring you a one-to-one interview with the Russian ambassador to the EU. Skripal, Trump, chemical weapons in Syria, Ukraine, and much else to discuss besides. See you in a few moments.